back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. So, Squirrel, we heard from a listener, and as we say, we always like to hear feedback from listeners, and this was on the Agile Conversations Slack, where we post
Slack!
all of our.
Oh no, the spawn of Satan. But apparently we have a Slack communication channel, which I'd forgotten about completely, and I'm going to try to forget again.
Yeah, well, you do say in our outro that we have all these different ways, and this is one of them. But Samir, one of our listeners there, posted in response to our Fear of Daily Demos episode, link to both the Slack and that episode in the show notes, um, where he said we missed something in talking about daily demos. And you know what? I gotta say, I think he's right. He's got a very good point. And so I thought we should talk a little bit about what he said and what we missed and what people can do about it. So how does that sound to you?
Sounds great. And Samir's an old friend of Troubleshooting Agile, so I'm sure he'll have very interesting ideas. Can you summarize what he said?
Sure. Basically, he started with the observation that he would be very nervous for his team, for example, to just adopt daily demos. He doesn't think it would work, and he says there's some prerequisites you need. And he said it a couple things, which is first of all you need some kind of product direction that's not simply more features, more better. So don't, not just churning out features. And he also said you need a team that must be working together as a team. Now, these are two I think are a little bit weaker than what he said afterwards, because then he said perhaps another
Yeah,
way
I
to
don't
put
agree with
this.
either of those, by the way, but I think the third one is stronger. Go ahead.
Yeah, and he said another way to put this is I think that daily demos are a reasonable request from an invested and hands-on stakeholder, not middle management. And I think that's the key insight that we missed. And I think we can get through that through talking about kind of what we expect to have happen. But I did ask him. I said, well, what do you think would happen if your team did start doing them? So let's say you're missing some of the prerequisites. And he says, well, I just think the daily demo would be a lot of like, sorry, I've got nothing to show today. and and I will say that actually completely matches my experience when I start working with teams on sort of daily predictions and daily demos. And I think you often see the same thing too. Is that right?
I certainly do, and let me just respond to a couple of those things. So the first is the common name for this, which is due to Alistair Coburn, is elephant carpaccio. Break up your big product direction into tiny, tiny slices and show tiny, tiny progress very frequently and get a lot of feedback. So I teach people about that. I've got a booklet on that. If anybody's interested, just drop us a note and I will send you a copy. I teach people this all the time. And our previous episode was about the resistance that I sometimes see when I come along and say, hey, let's try this. And it's not because of Samir's reasons, it's because the team are afraid. And so that's from our previous episode. But actually, I see that things like team cohesion and product direction and so on, the lack of those becomes really evident once you start trying to show your progress every day. Because if you just have a bunch of disconnected features and you show them to an interested stakeholder, which is why his third point is more valid for me, then it rapidly becomes evident that you're not doing elephant carpaccio, you're doing like fly carpaccio, right? You're breaking up a whole bunch of tiny little things, fruit flies, into tiny slices, and you're not getting to an overall elephant. So I agree with him, at least on the third point, that that's a very important element. I think you could even start with demoing whatever it is you did today, even if you didn't have that, but it wouldn't be as valuable. And I think you could get to so the valuable realization that you better go find yourself someone like that who can help you not to be carpaccioing your fruit flies.
Well, I think that's the thing is that the question is who's going to be the person who's kind of making sure that that realization happens. And I think that's the person I think of as being the invested hands-on stakeholder. So if you're there coaching it, you're the invested hands-on stakeholder of the daily demo and making sure that we do this. Because I'll say, I've certainly, when I start working with a team, most often I find certainly that they're not necessarily working as a team on a unified thing. The question of if there's a sort of product direction, it might not be something that's been clearly communicated to everyone. But the main thing that I'm going to use is I'm going to use the daily demo as a way of building team cohesion, and also making it clear what trade-offs we're making, what our decision-making process is, and a lot of times that might not be very clear at the beginning. But part of like you're saying is we're going to make the lack of clarity and the lack of cohesion evident. But we can only do that because I'm there as an invested, hands-on person, where I may not be the ultimate stakeholder for the product, but I'm a stakeholder for the process, and therefore I can lead the conversation in some ways. One of the things that Samir, the reason he said there'd be nothing to demo, is I think is a good example of what can happen. He said, well, because we actually end up spending a lot of our time doing things like support and keeping the lights on and maintenance, and therefore the new feature work wouldn't be done. And in my view, if I'm driving that process, I'm like, great, we're surfacing reality very rapidly here. Now, what do we want to do about that? And one of the things that Samir said was part of the reason that they have all this hands-on work is because if they try to automate it, people complain, well, we're not delivering features. Yeah, the daily demo is a place where we can start making that trade-off of, hey, this is actually taking a lot more time than is visible. What do we want to do about it? And I think, Squirrel, your experience is very similar.
It is indeed. And typically what I do is I say, great, so you do have something to demo. You can demo the bug that you fixed. And the person says, yeah, it was a one-line fix. I had to change the grammar in an error message. It's not very exciting. I say, great, let's look at a not exciting demo. And then, because we will be bored in the demo session and we will have somebody empowered to do something about it, that is the best way to stop being bored. So if you think you have boring or less valuable or not very sexy stuff to demo, that's exactly why you should demo it, so that you can get out of the position of demoing it as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the thing I remember doing over and over again is people would say like, well, I haven't, it's not visible in the UI yet, so we can't really demo it. And I did really want demos to be from the UI, but they'd say like, oh, all I have is, the XML. I'd be like, great, demo the XML. Let's see what it looks like. If I'm using the same idea that you are, which is let's demo what got done, even if it wasn't what you predicted. Let's try to see something if there's something that's being produced, if there's some output. I don't want to see just code. That's not a demo. But if all you have is a test that runs, or all you have is I can go to this place and there's some unstructured JSON. Yeah, here's some JSON output. Great. Let's look
New
at some
database
JSON.
table with better indexes, something like that. It
That's
doesn't
fine.
really count as something customer facing, which is what you ultimately want to demo so that you can get a steer on whether it's valuable. But it does give value to the team. And that's why I always make sure that we fix the problem on the spot. And this is again where Samir is exactly right, that if you have an empowered person there, you can turn to that person and say, we're going to put off the next 3 bug fixes, and we're going to put in something that allows us to avoid this problem or detect this problem sooner or work around it, so we don't even have to use the buggy old Excel sheet or whatever it is that is causing us trouble. And what do you think? Or would you like to see 3 more really boring demos? And almost universally, that gets to an interesting conversation. Doesn't necessarily get the result you might expect, but you do move forward. And so I'd encourage people not just to have boring demos. That would be the opposite. That would be a good way to stop having demos altogether. But to have one boring demo and fix something about it, and have another one for a different reason and fix that. And there's a finite number of causes, so you will quickly get to much more interesting sets of things to look at.
Well, it's a really important point that you just said. There's a finite number. You're going to make some progress because there's 2 theories of learning that I think are super important about what's going on here. And the first one that I'm going to talk about comes from action learning, and what it says is there's no action without learning, and there's no learning without action. And another way to put this is if you, and I often put it this way, if you haven't changed your behavior, then you didn't learn. And what you're saying here is you're using the demos to do the type of learning where the system changes. It's an active process where we learned that we have this problem from the fact that we couldn't demo what we wanted. Now let's fix that problem that was surfaced so we can't have it again. And eventually, as you work through the problems, well, then suddenly you have something that's much more performant. I think that's capturing what you're describing there, isn't it?
It certainly is. And boy, I can think of 100 different examples of people who have learnt but not action learnt. Um, and there was a roundabout I tried to use in Rhode Island. And by the way, for our American listeners, you don't understand roundabouts. It's very clear. So, and it came from somebody who had like heard a radio program about roundabouts, but had never been to one. So maybe we'll do that on a future episode. But there are plenty of examples of that type of learning which are disastrous failures. So what we're advocating is the opposite. But what's the other theory, Jeffrey? I don't know the other one.
The other theory about learning comes from Kurt Lewin, who was a early 20th century, so he's considered the father of modern sociology, and he has this model of learning that has to do with freezing and unfreezing. And I was actually thinking about this morning before we started talking. People may have heard a phrase that goes something like, "It's impossible for someone to learn something they think they already know." And in Kurt Lewin's phrasal, what you'd say is that someone who thinks they already know, someone who's confident that they're right, is frozen. Their beliefs are frozen. They're not open to learning, and that to get to a point where they're going to learn and change their beliefs, they need to have something, an unfreezing event, something that illustrates to them that they're wrong. And when they have that unfreezing, now their attitudes and beliefs are open to change, and then of course they're going to freeze again because that's just the way people are. They're not they're not in a state of perpetual openness, but they move through these periods through freezing and unfreezing. So that's my understanding of the theory, and linked to Kurt Lewin in the show notes if you want to investigate that more. But the idea here is that the reason I'm doing the daily demo is the same reason that I try to teach people through the scientific method and have them learn scientific thinking. And core to that is the idea that we're making predictions, and as those predictions are falsified, we then are unfrozen. That's the core dynamic of scientific method. Is when someone says, "Oh, I should be able to demo this by the end of day to day. I should be able to demo this at today's end of day demo." They're making a prediction. They have a belief that they can get that done. When they come in and then they can't demo what they expected, then there's the opportunity for unfreezing, and for them to learn something. And one of the things that happens at the start of the day is they think they really understand the work. They think they understand how to make good estimates. They feel confident, and then after after repeated failures of this, they become a little bit more open that maybe there's something missing and something they need to change about. And now sometimes it's the system, like you were describing. Well, maybe there's a problem with the way we do our deployments. We'll automate things. We'll smooth things out. But there is this core element of someone's skills and ability and their understanding of the job. And I find that people become a bit more humble and start working in smaller increments because they suddenly realize, have a better understanding of where they actually sit, what their understanding actually is. So they become a bit more humble, move a bit slower, and learn a bit faster. So that to me is a core reason to be doing these daily demos. But to Samir's point, you need someone there who's invested as a stakeholder to make sure that the learning cycle is actually happening, that we're having the ability to go and say, yeah, go ahead, let's demo your JSON. And then by the way, if there was a problem with the deployment, let's fix that. Let's make the investment in fixing these things. But you only get that if you have that invested, involved, hands-on stakeholder, and someone who is just merely implementing a process they're not really bought into, which is what I think he meant by middle management. You're not going to get these dynamics. You're not going to get these kind of interactions. At least that's my experience. What's your thoughts?
Well, echo all of that and just add that a common source of resistance, which is uh, uh, amply addressed by this particular theory, is the person who says, I could definitely demo every day. I keep my code working perfectly. My tests always pass. Everything's perfect. You're just going to slow me down by taking out a bunch of time for me to demo and have everybody else do it. I'm gonna go slower. So just leave me alone. I'll see you in 6 weeks, and I'll have the perfect, amazing thing done, having done every piece of it every day, which I guarantee I'm doing. And I say, great, let's slow you down for a little bit and let's check. And what almost universally happens is when the person actually tries to demo and actually tries to have something ready, number one, it doesn't actually work. And number two, it's wrong. So
Yeah.
there's a rapid process of unfreezing and re-humbling, which causes this person to behave a little bit differently. Doesn't always work, but it often overcomes that particular source of resistance to frequent and high accountability.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll say I think it's also this is an important part of the stakeholder is sometimes the person who's learning is the stakeholder,
Oh yeah.
and someone and one of the things that happens in the demo is once we see it, we're like, oh no, that's wrong. Let's change what we had to do. You, the developer, absolutely delivered what I asked for, and now that I see it, man, what I asked you to deliver was missing something it was incomplete or it was something maybe a bit silly. So there's also a bit of humility in for the stakeholder as well, if they're open to that, and hopefully they are. They're going to have a much better outcome if they are in fact open to learning themselves as they go through here. But you can't get that dynamic with that kind of middle manager. I'm just a transmission vehicle, rather than someone who is empowered and able to make decisions based on what's happening, and encourage in the kind of trade-offs where you go and fix something rather than just like moving on to the next piece on the stack.
Well, if you have people like that in your organization who are unempowered, non-stakeholders, I wonder why you're paying them. So I will leave that one for our listeners to ponder and perhaps disagree about. And but this was a great piece of feedback from our friend Samir on a channel I'd forgotten that we had. So I'll just encourage listeners, if they disagree with us, if they see another major piece that we're missing or that we didn't think of, if you're trying daily demos and you thought they were a total disaster and you think they suck and no one should try them, all of those are interesting ideas that we would like to hear. So if you'd like to get in touch, the best way to do that is by going to agileconversations.com. There you'll find our book, Agile Conversations. You'll find free videos and articles by us, instructions on how to hold a conversational dojo, all kinds of fun stuff, all free. And of course, you'll also find apparently our Slack, which I had forgotten existed and will not check, but Jeffrey will, and Twitter and or X or whatever Musk called it this week, email, lots of other ways to get in touch. So we really like it when people get in touch with us that way. Of course, the other way to keep in touch with us is to come again next week when we'll have another episode of Troubleshooting Agile. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.